What are the best fall foliage destinations for 2019? How do you go about planning for a long road trip? We'll talk about these things and more coming up. So, welcome to the Robert Witham Show. I am your host, Robert Witham. On this show, we're talking about travel, the nomadic lifestyle, and simple living and minimalism. I want to thank you for joining me for this inaugural episode of this show. So before we dive into the content we want to talk about today, it might be a good time to pause since this is the inaugural episode of this show and ask, what is the Robert Witham Show? What's this all about? Well, basically, this is going to be a weekly podcast. We're kicking it off today, Labor Day 2019. So it's a weekly podcast. It's going to be available both video and audio. Traditionally, podcasts were sort of just audio, I guess, but it's become popular to put them in video as well. There's a few reasons for that. Some people just prefer watching the video to listening to podcasts, and also it does provide opportunity to include some additional slides or photos or video clips to augment the experience. So what's my story and why am I doing this show? Well, I'm a long-time nomad. I've been full-time on the road now for just about 4 years, and before that, basically my whole adult life, I've been as much of a nomad as possible, traveling as much as possible. Oftentimes that meant being a part-time nomad. I had a home base, and I was traveling every chance I got all over the country. Never passed up an opportunity for a road trip or a bus trip or a train trip or a flight or anything else. Just get out there and travel. There were times before 4 years ago when I was a full-time nomad for shorter periods of time, and then I go back to a more traditional life with a little bit of where I was a part-time nomad again. But I've been doing this for a long time. These days, I'm also a digital nomad, have been for the past 4 years, at least since I've been full-time again. So I work using a computer and internet connection in different capacities to earn money to keep food in the pantry up there and gas in the tank so I can keep on going down the road. Before hitting the road full-time 4 years ago, I was a journalist, did that for about a decade. I really love creating and sharing information, and so I enjoy being able to share information that's valuable to people, to help them out with useful things that are useful. I also just enjoy creating content that people find entertaining or enjoyable to watch or to listen to or to read, whatever the case may be. And for the last 2 years, a lot of my effort has gone on to our Meander project, which is why the YouTube channel's been a little slow, the website's been a little slow, that kind of thing. So I put a lot of effort into that Meander project. But also, at that time, I've also managed to create another book and launch some other fun projects. This podcast has been in the works I've had people asking me to do one for a couple of years now. I've been really wanting to do one for about a year, and it's just been a matter of working out the timing and everything right so that I could launch this and feel like I give it the time it deserves. So what's the show about then? Well, it's about travel. That's my thing. I travel as much as I can, always have. So we're going to talk about travel. We're going to talk about the nomadic lifestyle, that is perpetual travel, or whether it's full-time or part-time, but you travel for extended periods. That's the nomadic lifestyle, and not just the mechanics of it, but some of the culture that goes with that and the other things that are related to being a nomad. Also going to talk about simple living and minimalism. Now, I'm a long-time minimalist as well. Actually, for a period of time, I was down to one bag, and I did travel across the country several times with just one bag, and everything I owned was in that bag. I have a little more than that now because, I have kitchen things and some tools to maintain the van and stuff like that, but I prefer to live simply. It works well for me. I was a minimalist before minimalism was cool, and we're going back several decades here. And I actually wrote a whole book about minimalism, so you can check that out if you want more of that story. But to me, minimalism is kind of a buzzword these days. It's a buzz concept, and I think you can get some benefits from minimalism by itself. But to me, minimalism properly belongs under the umbrella of simple living or voluntary simplicity. And back when I first got into minimalism, that's what I just called it, was simple living or voluntary simplicity. Minimalism wasn't really a buzz term yet at that point for the limited possessions aspect of simple living. So whatever you call it, minimalism, voluntary simplicity, simple living, I think it complements the nomadic lifestyle perfectly. It's really, in many cases, essential, but it certainly complements it perfectly. If you embrace that mindset, it makes a lot of the aspects of becoming a nomad easier, in my opinion. So we're going to talk some on this show about simple living or voluntary simplicity, including minimalism. So before we dive into our content, I want to briefly mention, too, that I am an author. I've written 5 books. My most recent book here, How to Be a Successful 21st Century Nomad, came out this last winter. Very pleased with that. It's been very well received. The most well received of any of my 5 books so far. I think that's a combination of improving skills over the course of writing 5 books, but also a fat part of that is just hitting a sweet spot with giving people information that they find really valuable and helpful and useful, all packed up into one book. If you want to learn more about that book, just go to robertwitham.com/books, and there'll be all the information there on where you can find it. All right, so we'll dive into the regular part of the podcast episode, and I want to kick these off whenever possible, whenever there's anything going on, with a section called Nomad News. What I mean by that is news that's of interest to nomads or perpetual travelers, things that are going on that would impact our lifestyle or that fall within our circle of concern. Topic for this week, I don't know if you've heard about this yet, somebody's been shooting wild burros in the Southwest Desert down in San Bernardino County, California. It's along the Nevada border. I think this is of interest to nomads because, for one thing, Deborah and I have camped in San Bernardino County, California many times. We have a couple spots there we really like. So we've been down there, and that's a basically pretty rural area. So we have seen wild burros down in that area. We've seen wild horses across the border in Nevada and done some videos and things about that. Featured some of those wild horses in our first issue of Meander magazine earlier this year. So we're very much interested in things affecting wild burros and wild horses. The wild horses are just majestic, incredible creatures. The burros are really cool. We love seeing them as well. We've seen the horses more than the burros, actually. But somebody's been shooting them in San Bernardino County, California. Apparently, according to the Bureau of Land Management, there have been at least 42 have been shot in the last few months that they're aware of, that they've found. This includes foals and adult animals, and some of them were even shot in a watering hole. Again, according to BLM, this is the largest known massacre of its kind. It takes a special kind of person to go out and shoot wild animals like burros and horses from a distance with a high-powered rifle as some kind of target practice, whether it's just because they're sick and want to destroy animals, or whether it's because, as somebody who's bothered because the burros might make their way onto their property at some point. I don't know. It doesn't matter. That's sick. It's worth noting here that the wild burros are federally protected. For the news reports I'm reading, they're indicating that officials are saying the penalty for killing wild burros is 1 year in jail, and since there are 42 cases, those could be stacked consecutively, and this person could be looking at some serious jail time when they're caught. And will they be caught? I believe so. So far, according to news reports from the last week, they don't have any leads yet. However, between BLM and a concerned citizens group, they now have a $50,000 reward being offered for information that leads to the capture, arrest, and conviction of the person or persons responsible for this burro massacre. Now, I'll tell you, there's a lot of people who would turn in their own grandmother for $50,000. That's a substantial sum of money, so it'll be interesting to see how this all turns out. But hopefully they catch this person quickly and stop them from being able to needlessly and senselessly slaughter animals that are just trying to get a drink of water in a muddy pond. Alright, so that's our Nomad news for this week. Hopefully other times it's more positive and uplifting, but that's what's going on right now. So moving on to other content here, it's Labor Day weekend already. It's been a hot summer. I've done an incredible amount of travel in the summer. I've been up in Wyoming. I've been to western Montana to pick up this van here that I'm in as I'm recording this. I've been all over Wyoming, running around, checking out some different trips. I've been over to Oregon, all the way to the Pacific Coast, did a bunch of the Highway 101. And Oregon was featured in our most recent magazine that just came out this past month. So that was exciting. But lots of travel. But I've been back in Wyoming now for a month or more, month and a half, and it's been hot. And I'm tired of the city noise, and I'm tired of the heat, and I am totally ready to get out of here. And so I'm glad it's Labor Day. And with it being Labor Day, it's now time to start thinking about autumn foliage. And that brings up the question, what are some of the best fall foliage destinations for 2019? Well, I got an idea where I'm going, and it's one of my 2 favorite places personally, but I'll share a few others that are often show up on top lists, top 5, top 10 lists for foliage, which I haven't seen myself. I've been to all these places, or nearly all of them, but I haven't been there in fall when the foliage was good. So I'll have to put that on my own list for future years, but for this year, I've already got my plans for foliage. Now, I'm a Yankee. I'm from New England, born in Massachusetts, grew up in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, then lived in upstate New York, just a rock's throw from Vermont, which is New England, of course. Upstate New York is not part of New England properly, but sometimes people try and call it that, but it's still in the Northeast. But anyway, as a New Englander, native New Englander, I'm partial to the colors there. The colors in New England on a good year are absolutely mind-blowingly beautiful. So many colors, reds and orange and yellow, and it's just spectacular. So I really always enjoy that, and so that's my top spot is New England. I actually looked into getting back home this year for the fall, and it just isn't going to happen because of the budget. It's an expensive trip to go all the way back to the Northeast. It's a couple thousand miles, and from there I'd be heading back to the Southwest desert. So it's like a 5,000-mile trip and a full-size van that likes gas. So, it's not going to happen this year, but hopefully next year I can pull that off again. But it's amazing out there in the Northeast and New England. So that's a top spot for me, and it's a top spot for a lot of people. Some of those destinations within that include things like the Berkshires in Massachusetts, or the Catskills in New York, or the Adirondack Mountains in northern New York, the Green Mountains in Vermont, the White Mountains in New Hampshire. There's just so many choices. Over in Maine, there's so many choices. It's just amazing. So that's worth seeing if you're in the northeast part of the country or get there some year. Usually around early October. Of course, it varies year to year, and it's hard to say. But, anywhere late September into early October, you usually get a good week or so of peak. So you kind of got to be ready. But that's worth seeing for sure. My other favorite, as of 2 years ago, is Colorado, the Colorado high country up in the mountains. I've been through Colorado tons of times over the last 20 years, and 2 years ago was the first time I was there in the fall. And it doesn't have the reds and oranges very nearly so much like New England does, but when the aspen in the mountains turn yellow, it really is golden color. They just shimmer in the sunlight. It is amazing. So I've got a video on my YouTube channel from 2 years ago that showcases some of that from when I was there, so I'll throw a link in the video description and in the show notes to that if you want to check it out. Alright, so those are my 2 favorites, and I've been other places, but those are the ones that have stood out to me so far. So what are some of the other top spots that are often recommended or often come up in lists of the best fall foliage destinations? Ozark National Forest and Lake of the Ozarks in Arkansas often comes up. The photos sure look pretty. So I've been through Arkansas once, a year and a half ago now, so maybe I can make it back sometime in the fall and see that. The Columbia River Gorge in Oregon. I've been to Washington several times, all the way across the state from, Spokane over to Seattle and across the Puget Sound, even to Port Angeles. And then I've been in Oregon now a couple times. This time I did a lot of exploring. I didn't quite make it to the Columbia River Gorge, though, although I did cross the Columbia River on Astoria. But, I didn't get inland a little bit there with a lot of waterfalls. I did want to. I just didn't have the time and gas on this trip. So hopefully next time. But the Columbia River Gorge is supposed to be amazing in the fall with the colors and all the waterfalls, and it's supposed to be really pretty. So that's probably worth checking out if you're in the Northwest. Eastern Shore in Maryland is supposed to be pretty great. I've been down there, but not in the fall, so that would be cool to see sometime. You may want to check that out if you're in that mid-Atlantic region this fall. And the Enchanted Circle Scenic Byway near Taos, around Taos, is supposed to be pretty epic in the fall for the foliage. I've been through New Mexico a bunch of times, been to Taos several times, camped near Taos in the spring a few years ago now, might be 3 years ago now. And Deborah and I were there together, and we got snowed on. That was a whole lot of fun. Actually, it was a major storm coming in, and the storm was so big we couldn't get out of it. So it was like several hundred miles to get out of it. And fortunately, it only ended up being a few inches where we were at, but the forecast was a foot or more, and we'd have been stuck there for a while if that happened. So we were stocked up on supplies. We were in good shape. We could ride it out. But just north of us, up in Colorado, they got like 18 inches. So we didn't miss it by much. But in the fall, it's supposed to be really pretty. So I don't think I'm going to make that this year. I think I'm going the other direction. But that's something that if a lot of nomads are migrating back towards Arizona, might be worth going through Taos and checking out the Enchanted Byway there. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee and North Carolina, again, is supposed to be really incredible. I've been through there many times. I have some vague memories of fall drives along the Blue Ridge Parkway in Virginia when we lived down there when I was a kid for a little while. My folks were both New Englanders, and so they wanted to see some foliage, so we always did that in New England, but they went out on the Blue Ridge Parkway, so different but still very pretty. And the Great Smoky Mountains National Park is renowned for its scenery in general, and again in the fall it's supposed to be really nice. Upper Peninsula of Michigan's another one that makes the list a lot. I've been through the Upper Peninsula of Michigan a bunch of times, both as to do some tourism and to just traveling through. I've been through there mostly in summer. Went through there once in winter around Christmas time, right after Christmas. The snowing so bad. Driving a rear-wheel drive car with studded snow tires. I had chains in the trunk. It was snowing so bad that literally we were the only car on the road in some of the small towns, and everybody else was riding snowmobiles. So yeah, but it was pretty. But I wouldn't do that again. But this is back before we had smartphones. So you get the weather easily, so sometimes you get surprised on the road by what you ran into with weather. But the fall up there is supposed to be really nice. I've been there in summer and I've been there in winter. I haven't been there in fall that I recall. So that's if you're up in that northern part of the country, that might be somewhere you want to check out this year for 2019. And finally on this list, Glacier National Park in Montana. Again, I don't think I've been through there in fall. I've been through Glacier National Park in the summer. I've been up there in the wintertime with it snowing like crazy. Driving through, heading back to New York for Christmas one year. This is back in 1999, I think. And drive about midnight and it's snowing and I got the studs on, chains if I need them. It's coming down like crazy. Everybody's asleep in the car, and I saw a wolf run across the road in front of me. Coolest darn thing. In the headlights, just like whew, in the snow. It was really cool. And of course, this is for, we had GoPros on the dash and stuff like that to try and capture it. So, I just lost that. But it's in my memory. So I'd love to be able to share it with you otherwise. So the glacier's really cool. And you don't get you don't like with Colorado, you don't get the reds and the oranges and stuff that you get out east. What you get up there in the Montana mountains and around Glacier is the western larch turn yellow. As you get these evergreen forests and that are all green, and everywhere there's western larch they turn yellow in the fall, and that's really pretty and very unique thing to see. And so I've seen plenty of western larch turn in the fall because I used to live in northwest Montana, and it is very pretty, but I haven't been to Glacier in the fall. That's supposed to be really epic. So if you're up in that part of the world, Glacier National Park is probably worth checking out for a fall foliage destination this year. So that brings us to our next topic, which dovetails nicely with foliage. That's trip planning. How do you plan a long road trip? Well, there's probably plenty of ways to do it, but I'll share today what my process is right now. It's kind of evolved over time, but this is kind of my process, and I hope that that's maybe helpful for you if you're kind of new to this, or you're just thinking your system isn't working, you're looking for something different. Maybe this will help you out to know how I'm doing it. And I just have been doing this in the last week as I'm getting ready to leave Wyoming and head south. And one of the things, of course, I want to see is foliage. And so I'm planning a long trip from Wyoming to Arizona with some stops along the way based on things I want to see and things I need to do. So I'll walk you through my process. I hope it's helpful to you, or at least entertaining. If it's not the way you do it, you may be thinking, why is he doing that? But this is something that has evolved for me over the course of years, and that at least right now is working pretty well for me. So I'm a full-time nomad, but I still tend to often plan out segments because I'm not like perpetually moving. I'm moving to places. So, like I said, right now I'm leaving northeast Wyoming, heading for southwest Arizona and the desert eventually, but it's going to be over the course of several months. And then I'll kind of be in that area for a while, and then I'll make another trip somewhere else. Recently this summer I went to Oregon, and so my destination was to Oregon and the back end, so I went to do a similar process for both ends of that trip. So the first thing that I do is decide on an end destination. And you say, well, you're a nomad, you're always moving, but again, you want to plan in segments most likely, so because you probably don't want to plan out the rest of your life, for everywhere you're going to go. So you're going to plan segments, and then if you're going like I am, I'm heading down to the Southwest Desert. That's basically my destination. Is going to be the Quartzsite, Ehrenberg, Arizona area, and of course I'll do some migrating around and travel when I get there. But I know I'm heading there, and then I'll figure out from there what I want to do over the winter and that kind of thing. Other times you might be doing a long distance road trip, and you're coming back home. So if you're doing it as going somewhere, staying for a while, and coming back, you may plan that as two separate trips for planning purposes, or if you're doing like a loop, maybe you want to just plan it as one trip when you're doing your calculations and making your decisions. So once you've chosen your destination, you know where you're trying to get to, I find it helpful to consider points of interest or waypoints along the way that you may want to see. Now these may be scenic things like foliage, for example, my fall trip here. They may be family and friends you want to stop and see. They may be other tourist type things you want to visit, but whatever it is, you can kind of fill that in on a list, and you can do it on paper, you can do it on a spreadsheet, doesn't really matter, just that you kind of have some idea where you're going, where you're starting, where you're ending, and some of the things you want to see along the way. That'll help you with your trip planning. So once I've done that, I'll usually start looking at researching what camping options along the way. Where am I going to be able to camp? And this may vary for you depending on if you're staying in RV parks or campgrounds or trying to do boondocking or just doing quick overnights, stealth style, wherever. But you'll want to start researching camping, because that's going to affect, if you've got places you want to go and there's nowhere to camp anywhere around there, then you're going to have to either get a hotel there, or you're going to have to adjust your schedule accordingly. So you may camp before it, drive in early in the morning and visit that place or do that thing you want to do, and then get out so you can get past it to find camping again later in the evening. So that'll let you start filling that in and knowing how much time you're going to be able to spend in different places based on the availability of places to stay. Another thing I would start looking at now is weather conditions, and right now I'm mostly concerned about temperatures. So I'm leaving Wyoming. It's a Labor Day weekend. The last several years we have been having scorching Labor Day weekends. Again, this weekend it's in the 90s, low 90s, which is hot, and I don't know what that's about because it was like 80 for a while. And it's like every year I leave right after Labor Day weekend, and it's like every year Labor Day is scorching hot to send me off, and it's going to stay, the 2-week forecast is for it to be in the 80s right on out, so it's staying pretty warm this year for a while up here. But so what I'm looking at is I'm looking at elevation, and I'm looking at places that are going to be comfortable temperatures so I can get a break from that stuff, and I just want to get some nice weather. So I'm not so much worried about storms or things, but I'm looking at temperatures. If I'm traveling during the winter, as I often do, I often make a run from the desert up to Wyoming around Christmas time, and so I'm going to be looking when I'm planning my route. And then in those routes, it will be in winter and cold for so much of the trip. I'm usually not worried about stopping anywhere other than to sleep, so it's just a straight through to a destination. But I'm going to look at weather. So when I'm planning those trips, there's two main routes I can take. I can go up through Las Vegas and Salt Lake City, and then over across 80 into Wyoming, and then north again up into towards northeast Wyoming, or I can go across 40 to Albuquerque and then up through Denver and into Wyoming that way. Either one works. Going through Utah is actually a little bit shorter, but the weather sometimes is pretty terrible in both directions, but oftentimes it's colder or stormier in one route or the other. Now there are some middle routes you can go through, but I don't do them in the winter. Some of the roads you'd end up on are no seasonal maintenance or very limited seasonal maintenance during the winter, and you're just on back roads, and I try to stay off back roads in the middle of nowhere with no cell phone signal during winter as much as I can. So those are the two main routes I'm going to take, but I'm going to look at the weather and see which one's going to be more tolerable. It's not uncommon for one to be more stormy and the other one to be okay, or for one to be bitter cold and the other one to be kind of mild. So and oftentimes in winter, that's going to mean the Albuquerque and Denver route, because the Utah route does tend to be colder, and I-80 across southern Wyoming is like a wind tunnel that it can dishes out some brutal winds, and we throw that out with the snow, the roads get icy and they don't get maintained well. So that's just an example of some ways I look at weather in deciding on how to plan a long trip. Okay, campsites, when you start looking at those, my go-to campsite resource these days is Campendium. I also use iOverlander and freecampsites.net, but I find Campendium to be the sweet spot of reasonably accurate information, good details about cell coverage, which is important to me for work, and a fairly comprehensive breadth of reviews. You can also do things like just get your maps out, whether digital or paper, and start looking for public lands, and then try and identify what the camping regulations are there. You can get motor vehicle use maps from the Forest Service, which will tell you where you can camp. So those are just some other more detailed ways, but if you're traveling, a lot of times you're not going to want to spend half a day looking for a campsite, and it's convenient to look at a directory of sites and figure out where you might be able to go that's not too far off the beaten path when you're traveling through going somewhere. Weather, elevation's a big thing, because in the summer, lower elevations are going to be hotter, and in the winter, higher elevation is going to be colder and often snowier or icier. So that's just make sure you're looking at elevation when you're considering the weather. And as I said earlier, make sure you consider road maintenance, because some of these rural areas, they do little to no road maintenance in the winter, and you get yourself in a bad situation if you find the roads aren't passable and they're not doing much to maintain it. So make sure you think about those things with winter travel. And then winter travel, I say winter, but depending on where you're at, that can get into the fall and into the spring too. So if you're any time of year where you might be getting winter weather, be sure to consider the elevation and the road maintenance. What I do from there is I create a custom Google map. This is something I started doing recently, and I found it to be very helpful. And so I did one, for example, in Oregon for my photography trip, when I was out running around along the coast and stuff, and I updated it again for our trip back to Wyoming, and identified camp spots all along the way, and had pins on there for each campsite. And then I have done it again for my fall trip, 2019. Essentially what you do is you go into your Google Maps, create a new custom map, and then you enter the GPS coordinates or addresses for every place you want to visit or potentially camp. I like to color code the pins, so for example, I'll often use green for campsites and maybe blue for points of interest or things I want to see. You can also create layers, which can be helpful when you're trying to sort things. If you only want to see, for example, the campsites, or only want to see points of interest, you can just deactivate the layer that you don't want to see. So that's kind of helpful. You let you filter the content you're seeing. So that's useful. The other nice thing with that is there's a notes field on those custom entries. So when you click on the pin, you can give it a custom name. You can see that on a map, and you see your custom notes. You can put links in there. You can just put in notes about elevation or other things that can help you remember that you'd learned while you're researching. And what I do is I put on more things on there than I intend to use. I'll have more campsites than I expect to use, more points of interest than I expect to visit, so that I have flexibility as I'm traveling. I now have my basic waypoints and campsites, but I have the flexibility to travel at my own pace, and instead of having to research everything as I go continually based on where I'm at, I can just pull up my map and look and see what's in front of me and what I might want to visit or where I might want to camp. And it also makes it very easy if I pull to a campsite and it's full or it just doesn't meet my needs, I can just look at the next one on the map and go there. It makes it very simple. I'm not having to scramble to try and figure out where there might be another campsite. On longer trips like this, where I'm going like 12 or 1,300 miles from northeast Wyoming to southwest Arizona, it also can be helpful to think of it to break it into sections. So for example, I'm looking for fall foliage, so I know I'm going to want to be in the Colorado mountains mid-September. That's when we were there 2 years ago, and that was kind of peak. So I know that's what I'm going to want to be in the mountains in Colorado to see that. I'm probably going through Moab. Again, I love Moab, going back this year, I think. And last time we did that 2 years ago, I got to Moab in late September, and it was too hot. So I'm probably going to want to get to Moab early October to mid-October. And then again, I'm heading down into the desert, but I probably don't want to get to the desert until at least mid-November, possibly early December, depending on the weather for the year. So that gives me three basic guidelines or milestones where I know I want to be in places at a certain time frame. It's not exact to the day, but a certain time frame. So that lets me plan between here and there, between one major destination or the next, and so I know I've got 2 or 3 or 4 weeks between places I want to be, and I can just spread it out however I want within that, but still make sure that I hit the places I want to see, at the times that I want to be there, when I think it'll be the best time to be there. Alright, so that's how I went about trip planning for my most recent trip that I'm getting ready to undertake this week. I'll be heading out right after the holiday and heading down south. So that's how I'm going about it. I'd love to know how you do your long-term trip planning. You can leave a note in the YouTube comments and then the comments on the show notes. I'd love to hear what your approach is, and if you find this is helpful or anything. Again, any questions, of course, go ahead and leave those. Well, the Google Maps thing, I know I didn't show all that even on the video. If that's something you would find interesting to see a video about that, again, leave me a comment, and if a few people are interested, I'll see what I can do about putting together a video that shows how that's done if that's not something you're familiar with. So now it's time in this episode for listener questions. Catch is, this is the first episode, so I don't have any listener questions. But hopefully next week we'll have some questions here. So if you have any questions you want me to address, whether nomadic lifestyle stuff, travel, simple living, otherwise, again, leave them in the comments here on YouTube or in the comments on the show notes on my website, and you can check that out at robertwitham.com/episode1, and it will pull from those comments, and I'll bring them in and address them in episode 2 next week. Basically, this is your chance to kind of be a part of the show and affect some of the things that are talked about on here. So go ahead and leave me your comments. I'd love to hear from you. So this is a brand new program. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel already and you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you'll be notified when new videos come out like this one. This should be out every week, the podcast. And if you're listening on iTunes or another service, maybe go ahead and subscribe there so you can be notified when I put out new episodes each week. A note too, you can also listen to this on my website by visiting robertwitham.com, and each episode will be posted on there as well with a player, so you can watch it right there if you prefer the audio but don't prefer to do the podcast player on your phone or some other device. So thank you everyone for joining me for this inaugural episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found some of the information helpful or entertaining or at least worth listening to or watching. And we will be back next week with another episode on Monday. Thank you for joining me, and we will see you and talk to you in the next podcast episode. Thanks, everybody.